now by the one and only John Lott. I was a high school debater, and I remember citing a lot of your studies and debate rounds. So an honor to have you on War Room. I'm curious to
Well,
get
I'm,
your
I'm
thoughts on what
flattered.
you've done. You do great work. Huge fan. But you've really been, I think, the number one, stat data researcher pushing back against legacy narratives, the idea that, crime is a myth in our Republican heads. You even see it today, CNN talking about something that is a low-level criminal. I would love to get some clarification on what the heck that means. But could you sort of walk us through what the data shows us about the state of affairs when it comes to criminality in DC?
Right. Well, we have different types of data on crime. What people mostly rely on are the data that's reported to police. That's what the FBI data is based on. But the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is another part of the Department of Justice, has something called the National Crime Victimization Survey, where they survey about 240,000 people each year. And the reason why they do that is we've known for many decades that not all crimes are reported to police, and that gap varies systematically over time based primarily on whether people think the criminals are going to be arrested or convicted. Now, normally over time, those two numbers, the total number of crimes and the ones that are reported to police, have tended to move up and down together. Unfortunately, basically since COVID, that hasn't been the case. And there are multiple reasons for that. One is there's been nationally a drop in arrest rates. You also have parts of the country where 5 years ago or 6 years ago, if you'd called up the police to report a crime or 911, they would send out a police car. Now there are parts of the country when you call up, they'll ask you, is the criminal still there? And people will usually say, no, he's already left. And then they'll say, well, you can come down to the police station and wait in line and fill out a police report. And the problem is that there are some people who otherwise would have had their crimes reported. Now that you make it more difficult, more time consuming for them to do it, say, it's just not worth it because they're less likely to go and catch the criminal to begin with. I mean, back in 2022, the arrest rate for violent crime for cities with more than 1 million people, there are 9 such cities in the United States, had fallen to 20%. And, when it gets to be something like that, people ask, is it really worth it? And for property crimes, it was even much less. And that's 20% of reported crimes. If you look at the percentage of total crimes, you're talking about only about 8% are reported to police.
And I'm curious. I was sent over one of your pieces. You were talking about how I think, the attack on the Doge engineer is kind of emblematic, I think, of the status quo in DC. But you were talking about how, quote, Trump's move for FBI agents and the National Guard will increase arrest rates, and simply the threat of arrest will reduce the crime rate. I'm curious your thoughts on what exactly the mechanisms are of the plan that President Trump has put forth are going to be the largest drivers you think of potentially bringing either the arrest rates up or the murder, choose your crime, that number down. Is it a function of, having the National Guard there? Is it really the arrests that'll be making the largest impact?
Well, I think it's a function of many things. Look, the bottom line is this: it's not rocket science. If you want to reduce crime, you have to make it risky for criminals to commit crime. Uh, they haven't been prosecuting a large percentage of the violent criminals in Washington, D.C. Those been decisions by the U.S. Attorney during the Biden administration, as well as decisions that the district itself makes, particularly with regard to juveniles. And Pirro today was saying that she wanted to have the laws changed so that the U.S. attorney, her, could go after these juvenile criminals that were committing crimes right now, because they would often be given very light sentences. So, look, here's the bottom line. If you want to deter it, you can make it risky in many ways. You can have higher arrest rates, higher conviction rates, longer prison sentences. You can also make it so that the victims themselves are able to go and protect themselves and defend themselves from crime. I mean, you only have about 1% of the adult population in Washington, D.C. that has a concealed carry permit. And there are all sorts of places where you're banned from being able to go and carry. So there's a good chance that even a lot of that 1% aren't going around carrying because it's just not practical given the number of gun-free zones that exist there. So, the fact that a victim might be able to go and defend themselves in a carjacking can also make it riskier for criminals to commit crimes. And if my research convinces me of anything, there are basically two groups of people who benefit the most from being able to go and have guns. They're women and elderly people, people who are relatively weaker physically. You know, I was chief economist for the U.S. Sentencing Commission. I must have read over 1,000 trial transcripts. And these criminals, they may be stupid in some sense, but they're not that dumb. If they see somebody who's weaker, an easier target, that's the person that they go after. And so, having a woman by herself is often a very attractive target for these guys because they feel the strength advantages that they have. They don't have to worry about anything that she might do. If you give her a gun or allow her to be able to have a gun for protection, that can often make a big difference. I mean, it's a great equalizer in that case. And the other group of people who benefit the most are the people who are the most likely victims of violent crime. And that's basically poor blacks who live in high crime urban areas. And there's a lot of those who live in Washington, D.C.
Obviously, another part of President Trump's plan to make DC safe again is that they're going to deport and just get out of the country a lot of these illegal aliens that I think are in and around the DMV area. John, I wanted to sort of dive down that rabbit hole with you too. I know you've done a lot of research into the crime rates of illegal aliens, much to the dismay and outrage. I was going to say of the libertarian right, but frankly, it's their corporate paymasters who want to open borders and cheap labor that probably don't like you very much. But your response to sort of the media's apoplexy over the link that President Trump is making between crime rates, plummeting or at least sizably going down if you fix the illegal alien problem in DC.
Right. Well, I mean, this is something nationally. During the Biden administration, if you look at total crimes, they increased very dramatically. In fact, during the first 3 years of his administration, which is all we have the official numbers for right now from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, there was over a 50% increase in violent crime. That's the largest increase over any 3-year period that we've ever recorded over the 51 years that they've had this data out. In fact, it's more than twice as large as the largest previously measured increase. And, so it wasn't people's imagination that crime was going up. And, it's hard to ignore the fact that that coincided with the open borders and this huge influx of many, many millions of illegal aliens coming across, illegal aliens who weren't being checked for criminal records. You look at it now, and my guess is, though we don't have the numbers, that we've been seeing a drop in violent crime. We've been seeing, at the same time, the border's been closed, and Trump is going out and deporting illegal aliens who have criminal records. But it's even the criminal aliens that he hasn't caught yet, he has an effect on because they know that if they get arrested, they'll be deported. And so one way to kind of keep off the police's radar is not to be committing crime right now. And so I think even for the ones he hasn't been able to catch yet, there's been this reduction in crime that's occurred. But, you just have to look at the numbers put out by the Biden administration. About a month and a half before the election, the deputy director for ICE put out a report saying that of the 7.4 million so-called non-detained individuals that had been released into the country, 663,000 of them had criminal records. Now, the problem is that many countries, like Venezuela, for example, would not provide information on the criminal records of their citizens that were here illegally. So that's an underestimate for that. Plus, the vast majority of these so-called non-detained individuals were ones who voluntarily turned themselves in at the border. And those are not the one. I mean, it's amazing you still have as high of a crime rate even with those as you do. But those aren't the ones that you should be most concerned about. We have like 2 million gotaways during the Biden administration, people that we saw coming across the border that we didn't catch. And then we have untold millions more that we didn't even get to see coming across the border because Biden had pulled off 76% of the border agents who normally would be guarding the border and instead used them to go and process the illegal aliens that they had let in. And about a third of the passive monitoring equipment, the cameras and other things that we had along the border were broken, and the Biden administration had refused to fix it. And so you have a situation where there was large parts of the border where there was no eyes on it. So we have no idea, and presumably the cartels figured out where those were. And so we have no idea how many more millions, but it's those people that you would imagine their criminal background is a lot higher than the 9%, which is an underestimate even then, of these so-called non-detained individuals.
John Lott, you do such wonderful work. I know the audience is going to want to read all of your writings. Where can they go to do that and stay up to date with everything you're working on?
Sure. Well, they go to our website at crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org. And they can also go to my Twitter account. It's my name, John R. Lott, Jr.
Thank you, sir, so much for joining us, and thank you for the work you do.
Thank you for being there.